Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. You ever have a morning where the air feels off? Not stormy, not dramatic. Just wrong, like something fundamental has shifted, but no one else got the memo. That was me, 2 weeks ago, walking into Sterling and Shaw, my home for the last 10 years, with a latte in one hand and a folder in the other. The folder held a decade's worth of achievements: campaigns led, crises managed, client portfolios tripled. It should have felt like armor. Instead, it felt like a farewell letter I hadn't realized I was writing. It started, as so many betrayals do, with an email. Subject line: Team Update. I clicked it while standing in the kitchenette, steam rising from the barely warm coffee machine. That's where I saw it. Claire, a woman who joined our team 2 years ago and once asked if Q4 meant fourth quality tier, had been promoted to senior client strategist. I blinked. Claire. Promoted. Over me. She was fine, polite, occasionally competent. But where I built 6-figure campaigns and salvaged accounts dangling by threads, Claire hosted brainstorms with themed snacks. She was also 26, loud on Slack, and just happened to share Spotify playlists with our director every Monday. Team culture, they called it. Fresh perspective. I felt something twist in my stomach, tight and bitter. Not jealousy, not even shock. Just that low burn of recognition when you realize you've been waiting for something that was never coming. I went back to my desk and stared at my screen, the same login I'd used since my first day, blinking at me with all the cold familiarity of a former lover. 10 years. I gave this place 10 years. I was the one who stayed late, who onboarded new hires, who once came in the day after my dad's funeral because a pitch needed to be reviewed. And for what? That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with Marcus, my manager. Subject line: Compensation review proposal. Polite? Neutral. But inside, I was vibrating. When I walked into his office the next morning, I was ready. I had my numbers, my results, my case built clean and strong. A 15% raise. That's what I was asking. Not some pie-in-the-sky dream, just a recognition of the revenue I'd brought in and the responsibilities I'd carried without complaint. Marcus barely looked up when I entered. "Close the door," he said, then gestured to the chair like I was interrupting something more important than my entire career. I opened my folder and began my pitch. Calm, professional. I spoke about growth metrics, client retention, year-over-year gains. I even mentioned that I hadn't had a salary adjustment in almost 4 years, despite increased responsibilities. My voice didn't shake, not once. He listened, for about 45 seconds. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. Short, dismissive, like I just asked if we could install a chocolate fountain in the lobby. "Melissa," he said, shaking his head, "you know I like you, but if you think you're getting a 15% raise in this climate, you might want to try elsewhere." He leaned back, arms folded, smile smug. "Besides," he added with a shrug, "everyone's replaceable." That word, replaceable. I sat there, folder open, resume of a decade laid bare, and heard it like a slap. Replaceable, like I was a printer cartridge or a broken chair. In that moment, something snapped. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I just stared at him and realized something I should have seen years ago. Loyalty means nothing to people who only look forward. I'd stayed out of loyalty, out of a belief that good work speaks for itself, that people notice, reward, remember. They don't. When I left his office, I didn't go back to my desk. I walked straight out of the building, folder still in hand, the echo of his laughter still in my ears. I needed air, space, something that didn't smell like recycled ambition and reheated lies. So I ended up in the park near the river, the one I used to sit in during lunch breaks before I stopped taking lunch breaks altogether. The city buzzed behind me. My phone sat silent beside me. And in my lap was a leather-bound notebook I hadn't opened in months. It was my someday book. Ideas, sketches, mind maps. Concepts I'd never shared fully because they weren't ready. Or maybe I wasn't ready to let go of them. I used to tell myself they were for the company, that one day, when I had a better title or a more receptive boss, I'd pitch them properly. But then something caught my eye. A phrase scrawled in blue ink across a page dated February 14th, 2021. Client Journey Matrix with Sentiment Overlay by Phase. I remembered it clearly. Valentine's Day. I was single, working late, and obsessing over how to personalize our B2B outreach. The Matrix was my baby, part data, part psychology, a system to track not just what clients did, but how they felt. I'd tested it on 2 accounts quietly. The results? Client churn dropped by 30%. I never got to finish the pitch deck. 2 months later, our innovation sprint launched something called the Client Emotion Engine. Same concept, different name, no credit. My name wasn't on a single slide. I'd asked Marcus about it once, half joking, half hoping. He brushed it off with, "Ideas are communal here, Melissa. Don't be so precious." That was one of at least 5 projects I could point to. Features built into our platform, taglines recycled from my presentations, UX tweaks that mirrored my mock-ups. They didn't just forget to give me credit. They took it. Deliberately. Casually. And now I saw it for what it really was. Theft. I flipped through more pages. There it was. An idea I'd called Pulse Panels. A feedback loop that would let clients rate their satisfaction in real time across projects. I'd pitched it at a strategy offsite 3 years ago. It was dismissed as too soft. Then, a year later, it reemerged as Project Live Insight, with someone else's name on the internal email announcement. That's when I stopped asking for permission. But I never stopped creating. I stared at the notebook, my thumb tracing the edge of a page. How many hours of unpaid labor had I given them? How much IP had they absorbed and rebranded while I kept my head down? I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just did the one thing I should have done years ago. I picked up my phone and called Harry. Harry Mercer, my old strategist partner, now head of product at Lemora Group, our biggest rival and the one company Marcus always made passive-aggressive jokes about in meetings. He picked up fast. "Melissa," he said, surprised but warm. "Wow, this is a blast from the past." "I'm not calling to reminisce," I said. "I need to talk, off the record, and fast." There was a pause. Then, "Do you want to meet tonight?" "No," I said, voice firm. "I want to know if you're hiring." He laughed. Not a mocking laugh, more like disbelief. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious." He got quiet. Then, "Send me your availability. Let's talk in 2 hours." I ended the call and stared out at the skyline. Let Marcus think I was replaceable. Let Claire enjoy her little promotion. Let them pat themselves on the back for running a lean team while siphoning ideas from the one person who never played politics. They had no idea that in 2 hours, everything they took for granted was about to become their biggest threat, and it had my name all over it. When I stepped into the quiet of the Rosemont Club, it felt like walking into another world. The air was thick with aged bourbon and old money, leather booths, dark wood, golden sconces, and a kind of hush that made you speak in half volumes, a place for secrets and second chances. I spotted Harry Mercer in the back, seated under a painting of a storm-tossed ship. Fitting. He stood as I approached, his eyes widening slightly. "Melissa," he said, pulling me into a hug that wasn't rehearsed, but felt like it had waited years. "God, it's good to see you." "You too," I replied, and meant it more than I expected. He gestured to the booth, and we sat. The waiter came and went before I even noticed. I didn't want wine. I wanted clarity. "You look good," Harry said. "But your eyes." "I haven't slept much," I said, "and I've been carrying 10 years' worth of ideas in a company that thinks loyalty is a joke." His smile faded. "I heard about Claire's promotion," he said carefully. "My LinkedIn blew up the same day. I figured something was off." "Off?" I let out a hollow laugh. Harry, I was the one who trained Claire. She doesn't even know how to convert lead cycles into usable metrics without checking a tutorial, but she shares memes in Slack. That's apparently leadership now. He nodded, not interrupting. I came because I'm done, I continued. Not just with the disrespect. With the theft, the erasure. I brought something I want you to see. I reached into my bag and pulled out the leather-bound notebook. The edges were worn, pages filled with sketches, matrices, and sticky notes layered like geological strata. I laid it gently between us. These are mine, all of them. Campaign concepts, client mapping tools, behavior models. Some of them go back 7 years. All of them were either implemented at Sterling under someone else's name or shelved until someone higher up decided to reinterpret them. He opened it, slowly at first. Flipping through the pages, I saw his expression change from polite curiosity to stunned disbelief. Wait a minute, he said, pausing at a diagram labeled Empathy Forecast Model. I presented that during a quarterly strategy session in 2020, I said. They told me it was too complex. Then 6 months later, they launched Client Emotion Engine. Same data set, same structure, different title, no credit. Harry let out a low whistle. Jesus, Melissa, they've been mining your brain. He kept flipping. This behavioral segmentation layout? That's the backbone of their new CRM rollout, isn't it? Built it myself, from scratch. And this pulse panels? I tested that concept in 2 departments. After it increased client retention by 30%, Marcus told me it was a nice internal tool, then pitched it upstairs under his own name. Harry closed the notebook gently, then looked at me, really looked at me, with something between admiration and fury. I always knew you were good, he said. But this isn't just strategy. This is IP. This is intellectual property. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Let me ask you something, he said, voice lower now. What do you want? I met his gaze squarely. A place where I'm not just tolerated, where my ideas don't need a middleman to be heard, where I don't have to smile while someone else takes credit for what I bled for. Harry leaned back, then forward again, elbows on the polished wood table. Done, he said. I blinked. What? I've got an opening, Senior VP of Strategy. It comes with a full innovation team. You'll have access to our global portfolio. Build what you want, how you want. Your name on everything. Triple your current salary, equity, stock options, and full rights to anything you bring in. He wasn't pitching, he was offering, like someone who understood value when he saw it. And your notebook? He said, tapping the leather cover. That stays with you. If we build from it, your name goes on the patent paperwork. You'll be listed as primary architect. I felt something twist inside me, like a knot loosening after years of being pulled tight. There's one more thing, I said, reaching into my folder. I handed him a thick document packet, copies of time-stamped emails, pitch decks, and internal memos showing the evolution of each stolen idea. This proves I was first, I said quietly. If they try to retaliate or claim ownership, this makes it very clear who built what. He took it with both hands, nodding solemnly. Melissa, I don't just want your ideas, he said. I want the future you see, and I want to help you build it. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the thick glass of water in front of me, watching the condensation slide down like a slow exhale. Then I said the one thing that had been waiting in my throat for years. I'm ready. When I stepped out of that club, the night air hit me like a reset button. They had underestimated me for a decade. But now, I was walking into a future where I wasn't begging to be seen. I was the one turning on the spotlight. I wrote the resignation email 3 times. The first draft was too angry. The second, too polite. The third? That one was truth, wrapped in just enough diplomacy to pass through the filters of HR. Subject, resignation, effective, 2 weeks from today. Body, Dear Marcus, after 10 years of dedicated service at Sterling & Shaw, I have decided to tender my resignation. This was not a decision made lightly, but after thoughtful consideration, I believe it is time for a new chapter in my professional journey. I am proud of the work I've contributed, the teams I've led, and the impact we've made together. I will ensure a smooth transition of responsibilities and am available to support handovers as needed over the next 2 weeks. Thank you for the opportunities and the lessons, both taught and learned. Sincerely, Melissa Byrne. I hit send just after 8 a.m., before the inboxes of the office were even properly awake. I sat there for a moment, staring at the screen, my heart not racing but steady, like it already knew the storm was coming. At 8:37 a.m., I heard the unmistakable rhythm of Marcus's shoes, his sharp, urgent pace always 2 steps faster when he felt power slipping. He didn't knock. "Melissa," he said, tone clipped. "A word?" He was holding his phone, thumb still pressed against the screen. As if the resignation email were an offensive meme he couldn't believe someone dared to send. I turned slowly. "Morning, Marcus." "Is this a joke?" he asked, holding up his phone. "You're resigning? Now?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I am." He stared at me, waiting for me to flinch. I didn't. "This is because of the promotion, isn't it?" he said, walking into my office uninvited, shutting the door with too much force. "Claire, that's what this is about?" "No," I said. "This is about 10 years of being overlooked, undercredited, and used." He scoffed. "Oh, come on, Melissa. You're not used. You're respected. You're part of the backbone here." "That's funny," I said, "because 3 weeks ago, you said I was replaceable." His mouth opened and closed. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet, and began quietly pulling out my personal folders. My pulse was steady, my voice measured. "I've accepted a role elsewhere, one that recognizes my contributions, one that compensates me accordingly." "Where?" he asked, suddenly sharper. "Don't tell me." "Lumora," I said. There it was. The pause, the twitch of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed like he'd just bitten into something sour. "You're going to our biggest competitor." "I am." "And you thought you could just waltz out of here, into their offices, with everything you've seen, everything you've touched, without consequences?" Now it came. The tactic I knew he'd use eventually. Fear. "Let's be clear," I said, still organizing my things. "Everything I created for this company was documented and tracked. Everything they built using my ideas, also documented. If you're implying legal action, I'd encourage you to tread carefully. I have records, lots of them." His expression darkened. "You think you can threaten me?" "No, Marcus," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "You're the one making threats. I'm just reminding you. Truth leaves a paper trail." He took a step closer, voice low. "You think Lumora is going to protect you? You think they're different? You're a commodity, Melissa. Today you're hot. Next quarter you'll be forgotten." I smiled just slightly. "Then I guess I'll make this quarter unforgettable." For a moment, he didn't move. Just stood there, trying to intimidate me with silence. But intimidation doesn't work when the person in front of you already survived 10 years of being erased. Eventually, he turned and left without another word. Over the next 2 weeks, I did what professionals do. I didn't drag my feet. I didn't ghost responsibilities. I answered every question, trained Claire's intern on our process tools, and created documentation so thorough that the intern quietly called me scary organized. I smiled and thanked her. I cleared out my office one drawer at a time, books I'd collected, a faded Polaroid of my team from 2017, the ceramic owl mug from the holiday swap that no one but Tina knew was actually from me. I even left the whiteboard clean and the plants watered. I didn't do it for Marcus. I did it for the version of me that stayed too long, hoping to be seen. The final day, I came in early. I didn't want an audience. I wore black jeans, a clean blazer, no makeup, and sneakers. My armor, not for show, but for strength. At 8:10 a.m., I left my access card on Marcus's desk. I didn't wait to see him. He wasn't worth a goodbye. I carried my box through the halls slowly, passing familiar faces, some with awkward nods, some with sympathetic smiles, and some pretending not to notice. Claire didn't say anything, just kept typing. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she thought if she acknowledged me, she'd feel the difference between us. Let her. I stepped into the elevator, alone. When the doors closed, I took one last look at my reflection and smiled. Not because I was leaving, but because I was finally starting. I arrived at Limora on a crisp Monday morning, early enough to see the skyline through the glass atrium before the offices fully woke up. The building was alive in a way Sterling and Shaw never was. Buzzing, but not chaotic. Energetic, not frantic. People moved like they had purpose, not panic. At the front desk, my badge was already waiting. Embossed. Branded. My name printed cleanly under a single title. Head of Strategic Intelligence. I blinked at it, then smiled. A young woman in a smart blazer approached me with a tablet. "Hi, Melissa. I'm Priya, your onboarding lead. We've got you set up in the North Tower, floor 16. Your team's already gathered for the kickoff session. Do you want coffee first or a tour?" I almost laughed. No one had offered me coffee at Sterling in years, unless it was by accident or during a birthday round. "Let's meet the team," I said. The elevator ride up was quiet, but my heart thudded. Not from nerves, excitement. Something I hadn't felt walking into an office in years. When the doors opened, I stepped into a space that didn't feel like work. It felt like possibility. Open layout, warm lighting, collaborative pods instead of sterile cubicles. A glass wall bore the quote, "Intelligence is nothing without intention." And then, I met them. My team. 6 people, all handpicked by Harry based on our conversations over the past 2 weeks. Analysts, strategists, and one particularly sharp UX researcher named Matteo, who had already built a wireframe for one of my pulse panel ideas before we'd even met in person. "Welcome," said Priya, gesturing. "Everyone, this is Melissa Byrne, your new lead." Applause. Not polite. Genuine. I blinked again. I spent the morning walking them through the systems I'd designed. The empathy forecast model, the modular segmentation engine, the real-time sentiment mapping. Concepts that had lived in my notebook now projected onto a touchscreen wall as we scribbled notes, moved tiles, swapped ideas in real time. They didn't question my authority, they amplified it. By Thursday, we'd already soft-launched the pulse panels to a test group. Early feedback? Client engagement up 18%. Session times lengthening. Satisfaction spikes tied directly to features flagged in the sentiment matrix. It was working. And this time, my name was on every dashboard. The head of partnerships stopped by my desk that afternoon. "Just wanted to say, we've never had this level of actionable feedback this early in a rollout. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I didn't know how to respond at first. Compliments still felt like traps. But then I realized they weren't being polite. They were being real. At Limora, no one hovered over my shoulder. No one stole ideas in late-night meetings or rebranded my work as someone else's pitch. Here, my calendar wasn't cluttered with endless alignment calls that led nowhere. My Slack wasn't flooded with passive-aggressive directives. My voice didn't echo back empty. Here, I was heard. I walked into my office that evening just before leaving. An actual office, with a door and a view and a whiteboard already filled with new plans. I sat at my desk and opened my notebook again. The same one that once felt like a secret journal of the unseen. Now, it was a blueprint. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't just dreaming of change. I was building it. By week 3, the real shift began. At first, it was just a whisper in the hallway, a rumor from the sales floor. Then a Slack ping from our legal affairs contact. Then the actual email. Client redacted would be terminating their contract with Sterling and Shaw, effective end of quarter. New vendor, Lumora Group. I knew the name behind the redaction before they even confirmed it. Paragon Insights. They'd been Sterling's prized client for 5 years. High profile, global reach, lucrative renewals. I'd personally designed half of their engagement strategy when I was still at my old desk, burning the midnight oil while Marcus called it routine maintenance. Now, they were ours. And not because we stole them, because we built something better, because the empathy model worked, because the pulse panel data gave them insight they never had before, because Paragon's leadership finally saw what Sterling never did. Me. That afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, my assistant buzzed in over the internal chat. "Melissa, a Marcus Sloan from Sterling is asking to speak with you. Says it's urgent and professional." I typed without hesitation. "Tell him I'm not available. No need to call back." Then I blocked his number. 10 minutes later, an email arrived from a generic info@sterlingshaw.com address. Subject: Confidential discussion request. Body: Dear Ms. Byrne, we have reason to believe that proprietary strategies developed under your prior employment may have influenced current competitive engagements. We'd like to open a dialogue before proceeding further. Kindly advise availability. Sincerely, Sterling and Shaw Legal Department. I closed the email and didn't flinch. Because here's the thing about being underestimated for 10 years. You learn to prepare like your life depends on it. Every model I brought to Lemora, based on frameworks I created independently, on my own time, using my own tools. I had timestamps, revisions, drafts, even emails from Sterling's own leadership dismissing those same ideas as non-viable or premature. I'd retained legal counsel before I signed my new contract. I'd even secured provisional patent filings for 2 systems, both now live at Lemora, both entirely mine. So when our legal team at Lemora responded, it was with quiet confidence. A single paragraph affirming compliance, citing precedents, and enclosing Melissa Byrne's pre-existing intellectual property documentation. Sterling and Shaw didn't respond again, but word got around. By Friday, another whisper reached us. 2 more clients had requested exploratory calls with Lemora. One of them was a retail analytics firm I once helped save from a failed product launch. During a weekend, Marcus forgot to show up. I wasn't angry, I wasn't gloating, but I was at peace. Because this was the consequence of what they did. They didn't just lose me, they lost trust, competence, legacy, quiet brilliance they never bothered to name. And now, they were learning the hardest lesson in business. When you bury a builder, don't be surprised when they rise somewhere else, stronger, louder, and backed by the proof they were right all along. By the end of the quarter, the cracks in Sterling and Shaw were no longer rumors. They were headlines. Sterling and Shaw loses 3rd major account in 2 months amid talent exodus. Internal sources cite toxic leadership and outdated culture as root causes. I read the articles over morning coffee, calmly highlighting phrases that once felt too personal to say out loud. Systemic employee disregard. Culture of dismissal. Attrition rate doubled in Q2. They called it an implosion. But those of us who'd been inside the walls knew the truth. It was a slow leak. Years of silent brilliance overlooked. Of voices talked over. Of loyalty trampled. Now it was catching up. Marcus resigned quietly 2 weeks later. No statement. No farewell post. Just gone. Word floated back that he'd left before the board could force him out. HR followed soon after. Then 3 senior directors, 2 client relationship leads, and Claire, whose abrupt career shift seemed suspiciously timed with the loss of another legacy client. What was left of Sterling was reeling, but they weren't done with me. One Friday afternoon, my assistant buzzed me from reception. "Melissa, it's a courier. He's asking you to sign for something from Sterling's legal team." I sighed. "Bring it up." The envelope was heavy. Inside, a formal complaint, a lawsuit. They were alleging intellectual property violation, not for the core systems, which were all verified as mine, but for one supporting framework. An obscure add-on I'd built as a prototype during my last month at Sterling, scribbled into a draft doc that, technically, hadn't been logged in my IP binder. It was petty, desperate, But legally, it was a move. I read the complaint 3 times. My chest burned. Not with fear, but with insult. After everything, after they erased me, discarded me, laughed at me, they were still trying to own my brilliance. That night, I stayed late at Lumora. I was in the strategy lab, reviewing notes, when Harry walked in with 2 mugs of tea. "Got the update," he said, sliding into the seat beside me. "Saw the claim." I nodded. "It's thin. They're clinging to a document that was never even implemented, but technically, they might have grounds." He leaned forward. "We'll fight it." "You don't have to." "I do," he said, "because what they're doing isn't about that file. It's about punishing you for being smarter than them, for leaving, for winning." I looked down at the contract draft in my hands. "I don't want to get dragged into a public fight." Harry's voice softened. "Then we make it quiet, swift. We bring in the best counsel. Cover the filing, protect your name. And when this is over, we file a formal defense, not just for you, but for every person who's ever been told their work didn't count unless someone else said it did." I stared at him for a long time. Not because I didn't believe him, but because no one had ever said something like that to me while I was still in the room. I nodded. "Okay, let's end this." And that night, as we prepped our legal team, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was drawing a line for the woman I used to be and the ones still stuck inside companies like Sterling and Shaw, waiting for permission to matter. It had been a good day. The legal claim was nearly resolved. Our lawyers had picked it apart, line by line, and Lumora's in-house team had crafted a counterstatement that was so surgically precise, it left Sterling's remaining board scrambling to avoid public humiliation. The settlement proposal came through quietly on a Tuesday morning. No admission of wrongdoing, but full withdrawal of the complaint. That should have been the end of it. Until I ran into Daniel. I was leaving a panel event on ethical tech leadership, ironic timing, when I saw him standing near the exit, arms crossed, face tight with something unspoken. Daniel had been my teammate for 7 years. Creative strategist, father of 2, one of the few people who stayed kind even when the walls at Sterling began to rot. "Melissa," he said as I passed. I froze. "Daniel." His eyes narrowed. "So that's it? You win, they fall, and we're just supposed to applaud?" I blinked. "What? You think this was just about Marcus?" he snapped. "People lost their jobs. Good people. People who didn't laugh at your ideas. People who stayed late to help you. Dozens of them. Gone." I took a breath, but he wasn't finished. "You crushed the company from the outside, and now you're a keynote speaker? You get a platform and we get pink slips?" The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. He wasn't wrong, not entirely. What had happened to Sterling and Shaw was systemic, inevitable. The collapse came from the top. But in the fallout, it wasn't just the villains who burned. It was people like Daniel, people like me. "I didn't want this," I said quietly. "I didn't want anyone hurt." "But they were," he said. "We were." He walked away before I could say anything else. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo of my old team from years ago, the one with Tina and Daniel and half a dozen others whose names never made it into headlines. I thought about what Daniel said, not the anger, the truth beneath it. Because he was right. I hadn't built the fire, but I didn't check who might be standing too close to it when it started to spread. The next morning, I called Harry. "I want to start a program," I told him, "for people who got caught in the collapse. Support, mentorship, job placement, resume help, mental health access, whatever we can do." He didn't hesitate. "Do it. Whatever you need, Lumora will back it." And just like that, the Bridge program was born. Within a week, we had a landing page up and a dedicated inbox. Former Sterling employees began writing in, some cautiously, others emotionally. We offered referrals, mock interviews, even group therapy sessions led by an executive coach we hired on contract. I did one-on-ones too, quiet Zoom calls with people I hadn't seen in months. Some were skeptical, some cried, but most said the same thing. Thank you for not forgetting. And I hadn't, because this win wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure the people who stayed too long in the fire got a path out too. It began not with a headline, or an announcement, or even a formal decision, but with a single thank you letter. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, slipped among mailroom deliveries and project memos. The handwriting on the front was familiar in a way I couldn't quite place until I opened it. Blue ink, tidy script, Samira C. She'd been a project coordinator at Sterling. Quiet, methodical, often overlooked. I hadn't seen her since the day they called her into HR and laid her off with a severance packet and a sorry I wish I could say more shrug. Inside was one simple message. The bridge program gave me more than a job lead. It gave me back my confidence. Thank you for seeing us when they didn't. I stared at the letter for a long time. Something about it reached deeper than any KPI report or performance dashboard ever could. It reminded me why I started all this in the first place. Not to retaliate, not to win, but to rebuild. To prove that brilliance doesn't expire just because someone failed to recognize it in time. Later that week, during a leadership sync, I shared Samira's letter. Harry read it silently, then set it down and said something that changed everything. What if we don't just support them? I blinked. Support who? All these brilliant people from Sterling, the ones you helped, the ones who trusted your program. What if we don't just help them land jobs? What if we hire them? At first I hesitated. It felt too big, too fast. But the more we talked, the more obvious it became. These weren't just displaced workers. They were survivors of a broken system, people who had adapted, led, innovated, and been shut out simply because they didn't know how to play the internal politics game. Some of them had already proven themselves within the bridge program. Some were ready to return from the sidelines. And Lamora? We had the resources, the heart, and, for the first time, the infrastructure to hold that kind of growth. So we launched Project Reclaim. Not just a hiring initiative, but a declaration that the ones who built quietly deserve to rise visibly. Our messaging was simple. We are not afraid to rehire the overlooked, the underestimated, the survivors of collapse. Talent doesn't die when a company fails, it evolves, and we're here to catch it mid-transformation. Within the first week of the internal rollout, my inbox flooded. Not from recruiters, but from old names I hadn't seen in years. Some were cautious, others heartbroken, many simply unsure if they dared to hope. I read every single message, and then I started making calls. By the end of the second month, we'd brought on 47 new team members, 36 of whom came directly from Sterling's former ranks. We created a safe entry process, trauma-informed onboarding, optional coaching. No one had to relive their past to earn their future. Among the new hires, Yvette, a data scientist whose ideas had been politely shelved more times than she could count. She now runs our AI ethics board. Leon, a middle-aged strategist who'd once been told he was too slow for scale. He's already tripled Lumora's turnaround rate on complex deals. And Samantha Tan, a lawyer I had worked with back at Sterling, sharp as glass and twice as unbreakable. She now leads our compliance division. The market noticed. TechBridge, a leading industry journal, ran a piece titled, Rehiring the Overlooked, Lumora's Bold Bet on Redemption Talent. Forbes called Project Reclaim a blueprint for post-collapse transformation. VCs began referencing us in pitch decks as a model for cultural reinvention. Even clients took notice. One CEO, during a site tour, whispered to me, "You've built more than a team here. You've built a refuge, and somehow turned it into a rocket." But more than the recognition, what stayed with me were the small moments. The lunch where two former Sterling employees cried over their first real feedback session that ended with encouragement, not condescension. The hallway conversation where someone whispered, "This is the first time I've ever said what I really think in a meeting." the team huddle where someone brought cake for a junior analyst's birthday, because, as she said with a laugh, my last company didn't even know my name. It wasn't perfect. Healing never is. But for the first time, we weren't pretending to move forward. We were actually doing it. Together. And as I stood at the launch celebration for Project Reclaim, surrounded by people who had once been called redundant, legacy, or non-core, I felt something deep and quiet settle in my chest. We were no longer trying to be seen. We were the spotlight, and we were just getting started.